All right, get your hoists ready. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Cory.
This week we will be discussing Phish and their 1994 studio album Hoist, the first time that we've ever discussed Phish on this podcast, quite shockingly, because it's Cory's favorite band, but we're finally doing it.
Finally here for a Phish album, and what an album it is.
Yes, quite a bit going on in this one, but I'm excited to discuss it. This album. It is their fifth studio album, I believe. Would that be it?
Yep, fifth studio album.
Okay, fifth studio album. Yeah. So they've been doing their thing for a while at this point. They had their ideas pretty down pat. But this is Cory, you said the reason you picked this is because this is the MTV album.
Well, of one of the
What
reasons.
reason?
Yeah, this is their biggest release as far as sales go in their discography. But this one for me was also the first album. This was how I found Phish. This album was on random, left in my house. I was playing music. We had our first apartment, and a random neighbor had left a bunch of CDs at my house, and I threw this in. And just you talk about subconscious listener, Phish was nowhere on my radar at this point in life. Now I was I loved music. I was all over the board listening to everything, but I knew Down with Disease from MTV. You know what I'm saying? Like it was, I don't know. It was just, I knew it. I automatically, when I listened to the song, I was like, oh, I've heard this song before. So it led me to listen to this album, and I started playing guitar over top of this album and really fell in love with it. And then the way the universe works, a buddy of mine who I really just met at a restaurant I was working at ends up leaving his keys, locking his keys in his car, and having to come back into the house. And we end up, he sees the album and he's like, I'm going next weekend. You like Phish? And I was like, I just started listening. I've never been. And the rest is history. I went on tour after that show, so it was the first venture in. This album holds a special place because of that. But there's a lot of cool stuff going on in this one too.
Yeah, a lot of stuff. And based on my reading, Phish was with Elektra Records, a major label, but they kind of felt the label didn't know what to do with them. They were on the fringe of the mainstream in many ways, but this album was, in their minds, kind of a way to integrate into the mainstream a bit more. Like they went out of their way to get guest musicians to play with them on this album and just to be a bit more mainstream and maybe get that radio play. And this was, as a jam band like Phish, this kind of was the time for them to do it in 1994. Because there were jam bands making pop hits like the Spin Doctors, Blues Traveler, the Dave Matthews Band released their first album in 1994. So it was a good time. It was as good a time as any for them to try and integrate into the mainstream. That wasn't exactly what happened, but they didn't need to do that because they had that loyal fan base. And Hoist went down as a bit of a lesson learned for the band. It's like we did some things that we decided we're not going to do in the future, and we're going to stay true to ourselves and not play the label games because that's not who we are.
Yeah, even though they chose to do this more, I guess in my opinion, stylized Phish, looking at their actual body of work, like this is, at that time, at 94, this was the most put together album in my opinion as far as accessibility to a mainstream audience. It's something like if you listen to Junta or you listen to any of the albums that came before, they were definitely more out there. The takes were more in the vein of Phish's wild, crazy antics. This one, we don't necessarily see so much, I won't say experimentalism, like we don't see so much of them experimenting with their antics, even though they still bring us a bunch of beautiful music on this album. A lot of these are staples in the live repertoire that we see to this day. Almost this whole album. You know,
Yeah.
you even see Riker's mailbox pop up every once in a while, which is pretty crazy. But I mean, it's few and far between. But they're going down this one. I mean, maybe Demand might be one of the least played live, but everything else, and Dogface Boy, but everything else still runs to this day. Dogface Boy used to run a bunch back in the day, but this definitely has stuck around in there in the mix.
Yeah, it does seem that way. I've looked at set lists. I was curious to see like have they done any of these songs very recently? And it looks like they have. This year, even with this Mondegreen Festival, even at the Sphere, there was one song I was shocked made it to the Sphere, but it did.
Oh yeah. Oh, I want to hear which one that was.
We'll get to it. Don't you worry. We will get to it. But yeah, so one funny tidbit about this album was it took some time to decide on the title, and one of the working titles for this album was Hung Like a Horse,
Yeah, man.
but they chose against that, just decided to they put a horse on the cover named Maggie to use that as a joke, and a hoisted horse. So that was a more clever idea, I think, better than having the calling the CD hung with a horse.
Yeah, the album artwork, the cover is awesome, but they even do like wild photos of them dressed up as like old vaudevillian, or like the one piece striped bathing suits, the strong man with the barbells or the dumbbells and whatnot on the beach. There's some cool stuff in this little booklet as far as art goes.
I'm sure there is. Look, just kind of selling their vibe to everybody. So yeah, the album was recorded very quickly, as was the norm for this band in late 1993. Some of the songs had already been tried out live, and it was released at the end of March of 1994. And it debuted at number 34 on the Billboard 200, and really very good. It was actually the week's highest debut. I went back and looked at the chart that week. So good for them for getting that. And it was actually one spot ahead of Pearl Jam's Verses, which had been hanging around for a while. But I noted that because we did that album on here last year. And ahead of this were several albums that we'd done on this show. So a pretty stacked year for albums, 1994 was. And some of them with a lot of longevity on the charts.
Yeah. I was looking. Did they end up doing singles for this album?
Yes, there were
Okay,
a few singles for the album, and
gotcha.
we will discuss them because you had to play the game. I mean, Elektra was owned by Warner Brothers. They did care about albums, but they wanted the hit singles out too. So that was what they were going to do. And Phish did that for a long time until their reunion, when they've been able to have their own record label and release their way, which they have the following to do it. So I can't fault them for doing that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, this is definitely I'll say a turning point, but like in the opinion of a lot of the Phish fans, 97 was one of the best years as far as the music that they were putting out live. And it was coming off of them trying to figure out this 94. I hate to say trying to figure out. I'm going to mince my words here because I'm talking about the boys, but they're really just trying to play that game that you're talking about with the label here, and still evolve as musicians. And this is huge when you look at how user friendly this album was, and how that wasn't necessarily their vibe, but how their music evolved from this point. It's pretty wild to watch.
Yes, and It paid off to an extent. This album was certified gold in 1996, and it is their highest selling studio release. According to Phish, the biography, it sold 650,000 copies in the US, which is that's a good number. That's an impressive number. We're just not taking any comparisons to other bands. That's a good number. And the critical reviews were pretty mixed, but Phish was not known to be a critical favorite up to this point, and they really haven't been since then. If we're being,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
just,
real.
yeah, the reviews were very mixed. Like the Village Voice gave it a dud, didn't even bother giving it a full review.
Which is insane to me, and not from like I'm doing this week as critical as I've ever been, and coming from a music critique standpoint, I can't believe that. I think that's a disservice because there's music going on here. I could see if it was like one of their avant-garde albums, so to speak, where it's really out there, but there's beautiful stuff going on here. So for them to say dud and not finish the review is shame on them. Shame on them. And that's not even me talking as a Phish fan, just as a critic to another critic. That's it's a little too much for me though.
But
But it's without getting on my soapbox, that's how they handle Phish. You know, there's so much talent in these four individuals, but everyone turns their nose up like pshaw to those dirty hippies.
I mean, yeah, but over 500,000 of them bought a copy of this album. So,
Darn right. And when you think about the majority of their actual listener base was really not buying albums, but more so trading tapes and sharing music before music was. I'm not even talking about Napster or anything like that. You know, you got out on a lot and cats were carrying around tapes of shows. I mean, there is a small bit of people who still do it, but back in the day, you would buy tapers seats, and there would be a section of guys with mics in the air and full backpacks, you know, doing FLAC audio back then. So that was a huge part of their listener base. So to sell that many records, more than the usual Phish fan picked this up.
yes, it did have a bit of crossover appeal. And I mean, if you do look at some of the aforementioned jam bands of the time, yes, Fish's numbers do look a bit paltry in comparison to what Blues Traveler did with Four,
Yeah.
which went 6 times platinum. The Spin Doctors' Pocket Full of Kryptonite went 5 times platinum.
Yep.
Dave Matthews had several multi platinum albums, but they were different audiences and they were able to make a crossover pop hit, but that involves playing a game to an extent. They chose to do that
Yep.
and it worked for them, but Phish just weren't those guys that they had a not the traditional consumer as their listener base.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild to see because I mean, even back then they were doing Warp Tour with Blues Traveler. You know, they were playing on the same level as Matthews. In my opinion, at that point, live they were playing on a level above Matthews, even though they were both touring in the same respect. But if you look at Spin Doctors, if you look at Matthews, if you look at Traveler, and this time, as much as I hate to say it, not so much as a crutch, but all three of them got over on MTV. Like they were over. The people loved them. They were super success. You look at the way Hook resonated with the community. You look at the way um, Little Miss Can't Be Wrong resonated. You know, these were bona fide pop hits where I really think that the label thought Down with Disease was going to be Phish's hit to, you know, Phish's hook or Phish's Little Miss Can't Be Wrong. And unfortunately, that MTV video did not hit correctly and ended up on Beavis and Butthead, with them making fun of it. And that era or that thought of Phish sitting inside of this pocket, this MTV pocket, is now out the door.
Yes, we will discuss that a bit more when we get to Down with Disease. But so we can get to it.
Yeah.
I think we have to start the track by track review.
Let's get at it. The old
Yes.
hoist. Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So the album begins with Julius. This song is based on the murder of Julius Caesar and the Shakespeare play of the same name. This is a kind of a blues funk tune, I would call this, and it's got the Ricky Grundy chorale as backing vocalists and the Tower of Power horn section. So great use of guest musicians there.
Yeah.
This is a very fun opener. I think the horns really elevate the song for me and take it to that next level. And it's a cool little story that they're telling, but really the point of this is to get lost in the music. And I think this song does that well, and that it's a really strong album opener.
Yeah, coming off or coming into this album, it's such a really great piece to start with because it has that blues accessibility. It has, I mean, you talking about horn section outside of like, oh man, because some of these guys cross over into a Chicago type of deal, but like outside of like Chicago or something like that, you've got Tower of Power here jamming out. And so those horns really bring a lot to the subconscious listener to grab people in on this album. And what a great way to do it with Julius. That riff is a riff that has stayed with me forever and can always bring a smile to my face. But it rolls and it's a good one. This is one that through the years for me always ends up usually being inside of an encore, which I love it even more there, but it has that draw here too, where it's something that really gets you pumped up. It's a fun dance tune, and it really sets the mood for going forward in this album. Not that it's going to be a super cohesive thought pattern as we go through this, but we get this really awesome blues banger to start it off, and it's a good one.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And we're going to keep it going with the aforementioned single Down with Disease, which is based on the band's keyboardist, Tom Marshall, getting mono. If you're sick, you write a song. That's what you do. And this was the single that they thought would really push Phish into the mainstream. And they filmed a video of them scuba diving in an aquarium. Got a bit of play. It aired on Beavis and Butthead. It was kind of avant-garde for MTV circa 1994. Because even other alternative bands had more polished videos. Even like the aforementioned Spin Doctors, like compare this to the Two Princes video. Yeah. It's such a contrast. This was out of the box for 1994 MTV. But the song did okay. It made it to number 33 on the mainstream rock Billboard charts. And the number one song that week was Shine by Collective Soul.
Heard.
So they got in there with all that. But I do think that shows that for the radio, this was a pretty out of the box single. And I think it works in that regard. It is a catchy song. It does have a strong groove. It's as radio friendly as we get on this album. But interestingly, it hasn't really endured in terms of streams as much as you might expect. Another song here really overtook it, even if it wasn't as much of a chart success. And it looks like this was a bit of a lesson learned for Phish. Like, we're not going to do any more music videos. Yeah. And we're not going to try appealing to that mainstream rock audience. And when it comes to chart success, they kind of found their niche after this. In the latter half of the 90s was and into the year 2000 was when they were able to find the proper audience for their songs on the radio and have a bit of that success because they learned that this wasn't really what we wanted. And it seems that the fans have responded to that by not making this as big of a hit on the streaming.
Yeah, see it without sounding like a huge Phish nerd here and being like, well, actually, but I feel like those streaming numbers are tough too because there's a lot of versions of Down with Disease to go towards. And in fact, if you look at this musically to live versions of this out or of this song, it's a bunch. It's a super super slowed down version. There's versions of this live that I've heard almost double this tempo. So there's different avenues to find this song, and maybe that has a bit to do. This one, as far as cementing itself inside of the set list and inside of their mythos and inside of who they are, this is a pillar of live shows. This is that get down dance tune when you're out there. This is one of my favorite Phish songs of all time, and I, with much chagrin, I say that this is probably one of the weaker versions of it out there. Even though this song gets down. This actually my first Phish show. This opened the second set, and I had already been blown away by everything I had seen in the first set. But to see just and hear Mike just come off with that bass line and watch this multitude of people start to dance uncontrollably was something that blew me away, and something that really drew me to the scene, because it was I've said this to you before, but to everyone else, it was wild for me to see that many people in one place with so much happiness and like no fights, no nothing. It was a wild scene, and this was the tune that I seen them all dance to. As far as musically goes, though, it's such an infectious song to me. With it's driven by Mike on the bass, and it really it sings. It's put together well. As far as I'm trying not to get too far off from the way we usually talk about albums. As far as the production on this song, it's really well done. I really like the way that it's mixed here. And in a pacing standpoint, it rolls well after Julius. It doesn't take us out too much. I will say they tend to, for this album, it still tends to have a control the pacing of this album almost very similar to what they do live, where at points they'll take you all the way down till you are about to lose not interest, but concentration, and then they'll smack you with a funky one. So this one keeps it going, and I like it in the number 2 spot here.
Yes, I agree. It does work very well in that regard. But you are a Phish nerd. Go off. That's what we're. And if you want more Phish nerd stuff, subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening to it, and also leave us a nice rating and review. It would be much appreciated. And follow us on social media. Links are in the description. And that brings us to our next track, which is a slower tune. If I Could. This features vocals from Alison Krauss, beautiful voice. Yeah, this song really showcases her very well. I think her and Trey Anastasio sing well together. And this was the song that surprised me the most on this album. Because from what I know of Phish, I expected more of like the Julius and Down with Disease kind of song. But this is a nice acoustic number, and I think it works really well for them. I wasn't, this is the biggest pleasant surprise, I would say. I wouldn't have predicted like this kind of song from them, but they did it really well here. And Alison Krauss does elevate it, admittedly, because she is that kind of singer and she can do that. but it really works. And yeah, this has been a very strong opening sequence of songs for me. And commercial standpoint, I know this isn't the most commercial band, but I do think this could have been a single and found a audience, actually.
I'm with you on that. Like I can hear this on country radio. I love this song. I will say that before I go off on all rants. This is one that I really, without this album, I would have never found them, or I probably wouldn't have found them as soon as I did. This song cemented this album for me because at the time, this was one of my favorite tracks to really just sit back and play guitar over top of. So I had a love affair with this song from the moment I heard it. Um, so much anecdotal tea on this song. I was convinced when I first heard this song that it was Dolly Parton. And it took me a bit to actually pull it out and look through. And of course, it was the beautiful voice of Alison Krauss. I unfortunately have never got to see her do this with them live. She was doing it a few times before my time. And then I think the last time she did it was like back in like 04, 05. But I it's one of my white whales. Actually, one of my first Phish shows, I was expanding my mind as one does, as I used to do back in my old Phish days, and I had reached a peak of this expanse, and I couldn't find the grass on the lawn to sit down. It was during Bathtub Jim and the Piper, and I was really starting to lose my stuff. And my buddy looked at me and gave me a kind word, but right out of Piper, they went in If I Could, and they played it for me. I sat back and relaxed and came back into it. But they hadn't played it in like 52 shows at that point. So every once in a while they'll throw me a bone, and it was this one. I love hearing this song. I think I agree wholeheartedly with you, where it's one of those ones that you don't expect because it's soft and beautiful, and it really fits her here, and it really fits pacing here. I can't say enough good things about If I Could. I listen to this song at least 5 times a week, even when we're not doing hoist. So this is my jam.
I can hear you there. I can see why. It's a very nice song. And I hope Alison Krauss joins them again for it one day. I know she's been busy singing with Robert Plant lately, but find some time, girl. Find some time. And after that, we are on to our interlude, which is Riker's Mailbox. This is less than 30 seconds long. And Cory, I'm gonna let you take the reins for this one.
This is where you get into this avant-garde stuff. This is where you get into wild Phish thoughts, so to speak. You see it a lot more on other albums. So
Sure.
this is just a little hint, a little taste, keeping it still accessible, but throwing in those Phish thoughts. This is one of those cult favorites. You know, if you get to see a little Rikers Mailbox shout out, you're pumped. Just one of those wild ones. I thought Tom Marshall was in on this one too, but he doesn't have writers on this. But it's just those little avant-garde thoughts. I won't say it takes me away from the album. If I'm being completely honest, I thought it was part of Axilla for years. Even with the CD, like you just hear it, you don't think it's a track. I'm almost positive it is no gap in between this and Axilla. And there was no gap in between Down with Disease and If I Could, and I love that too. But yeah, just a wild little thought here.
Yep, that's what it is. And then we go into Axilla Part 2. Um, this is a rocker. Actually, the it kind of reminds me of Kiss a little bit, which I was
Okay,
not expecting on this. And I like that. I love Kiss. I'm kind of surprised we haven't done them on this show yet, but
that's true.
we'll get there. We'll get there. I
All
have
right.
some thoughts on that band. Um, and I like that. I'm glad they tapped into that. I feel like it's a fun sing along kind of tune, but I do think that on the album, I don't know live versions, but here it does overstay its welcome a bit. I feel like thinking of the Kiss example, like the good Kiss songs are kind of short and punchy and cut off when they need to. This, in my opinion, in this format, does not. And the outro of this, I really don't care for. That's a pretty just, I don't see the point of that addition, and it does take me away from the fun first part of the song, which is most of it.
Yeah, this I've always been on the fence about that too. I will say that the outro for me is like an unsuccessful sweater song background. You know what I'm saying? Like it has that weird what's the word I'm looking for? Just this weird ethereal feeling, but it doesn't work for me. The slowdown doesn't work. It's something that you don't see live. This song you do see live and it jams out, but you never see them break it down and go into this slow, what in the community we call evil fish. The outro of this is very evil fish, and you don't necessarily see that much connected to Axla 2. But it's a good one. It's a rocker, man. You take that outro off it and it stands. It's definitely, again, I say so much of this is still in the run, but it's a pillar. It's definitely one that they go to a lot. It's part of Phish mythos, so to speak, and it's a good one. I think it rolls well here, but unfortunately, it's a bit of a pacing misstep critically because of the outro, and the outro going into the next song is a weird just it sets weird. It always has with me, so I'm with you there.
Yeah, and not the kind of song you want that outro for, I don't think.
Agreed.
The next track is Life Boy. I would think of this as kind of the singer songwriter ballad of the album. I feel like that's what they were going for here. And it's definitely about struggling with faith. The refrain of this is God never listens to what I say. Um, I like the concept of this song. It's one that I can relate to. However, I don't care for it. This is definitely my least favorite here. I just don't think the lyricism is strong enough to convey the heaviness of all of this for me. And I just find its poetry to be a bit juvenile. Just in that regard. And musically, I think this song's kind of limp. I don't hear a lot going on here. And it's long. It's almost 7 minutes long. And it does take me out of this album because it's like, okay, I've got the point of this. Let's move on to something else. And I don't think there are enough changes in the song to sustain the 7 minutes on an album. I did see that this was in one of their Sphere shows when I searched this song, which I was pretty shocked by because I just couldn't imagine this in that setting.
So it comes up. I won't even say it's a rarity. Lifeboy gets played, and it's another one that's been with them for a while. This is in I'll speak my opinion on this one. This is in the era of Trey has always been in his heart a singer-songwriter, but he still was working on becoming the vocalist and the songwriter that he wanted to be at this point. He wasn't like right now, Trey has reached, and I'm proud of him for it because the vocals were never really something that You always looked and said, they're okay at singing, but they're insane at playing. And Trey has really come into his own in his solo work and really honed his singing voice. This is a perfect example of him trying to do that back in the day and taking it a tad long. Um, the saving grace for me on this is it's Bella Fleck and him jamming together, and I love that. Bella Fleck sitting in on a little on a little banjo piece here is beautiful. I can see where you say it goes a little bit too long. I have to be 100% honest and say critically, it's tough for me to feel like that because I've sat and jammed with this song for so long. But on this album, it is one of the longer tunes other than Demand. And I guess I can see where it has the propensity to stay around a little bit too long. I 100% agree with you on the changes, though. There aren't enough musical changes in it for the length. But for me, I don't necessarily gravitate to that opinion only because I'm used to loving the long jam on them. And whenever Trey picks up an acoustic guitar, I'm in for a good listen too. but yeah, Life Boy is definitely an old school singer songwriter Trey jam. And it's in my 7th spot, so I can't hate it all the way.
I
I'm
thought,
sorry, it's in my 6th spot.
yeah, I was
Next
about
one,
to
7th
say,
spot. But it still gets the pass here. Definitely a good part of this album for me.
yeah, I will say, if you would have, there have been a few different vinyl versions of this, that have been kind of limited release, and in the cassette edition, this song is a side ender, and in a way, it works because I kind of hope the second half songs are better.
Sure,
I'll
sure.
say that. I hope I like them better, and they give me a little boost more than this one did in this context. So see what happens.
Yeah, no, as a cassette side under, you're right. It sort of works, and it sort of is like, all right, let's flip it over and see what's going on.
Yeah. And what's going on is track number 7, Sample in a Jar, which I read that Trey Anastasio said it was about sitting in a car with the seatbelt on drunk. Um, so that reminded me of an episode of Everybody Loves Raymond that got Deborah arrested. So just, yeah, I wonder again if Ray Romano knows some of these bands that we talk about on our show.
You never know. You
Yeah.
never know.
I mean, I know that Drew Carey is a sitcom star and a big fan of this band. I
Yeah, a
do know
newfound
that.
fish head. The
Yeah.
sphere changed his life.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. I would have lost it if I met him there. I would have been a total freak. I'd be like, "What? It's you?"
So many wild celebrities. Danny DeVito is one that pops up all the time. People like, I saw Danny DeVito at a show. Like, no, you didn't. And now with social media, you see cats, with pictures next to Danny DeVito at a show. There's all types of wild regulars as far as celebrities that are mixed in that crowd. Even the old John Mayer has been known to show up in a little bunny suit and chill
I
on a Halloween set. So
I could see that. Guessing that's I'm guessing they're very chilled out in that atmosphere. These celebrities.
yeah. Plus the rail riders like up front, that's a community, man. That's some hardcore heads that plan their day around getting up front. So I feel like the celebrities up front don't have to worry too much because those cats will turn around and tell a celebrity to stop talking, so they can listen to the band. You're pretty safe up there as far as celebrities go. Nobody's really worried about anything but the show.
That maybe Chapel Roan needs to go to a few shows for Phish if she doesn't want to be bothered. That's anyway. Yeah, so Sample in the Jar. This was actually the second single. It did not make it on a Billboard chart, but it peaked at number 49 on the Radio and Records Rock chart. This is the most streamed song on the album by a mile. And I can see why. It's a solid tune. I can like understand why they thought, okay, this was a good single. It's a very solid mid-tempo song. It has a good hook to it. Sample in the jar. It's got that going for it. I'm sure it's a fun song live as well.
Hot tea take. This is one of my least. This is a grower for me, but this is one of my least favorite Phish songs, or was for a long time for me. People have so much fun listening to it. I don't know if it was the negative connotation in like the connection to the lyrics for me, or I don't know what it was, but sample never really hit with me until I'll say the latter third of my listening years. And I've seen sample a million times, but it's one where I'm like, eh. Now live it gets down, and the Trey riff inside of it is an iconic Phish riff. Um, as accessible as it is, it used to be one of my least favorite Phish songs. As far as on this album, though, it does its job, especially if this is a cassette side opener. Sample ends up being an opener a bunch in our live realm, but it I don't know. Sample. I try to take the Phish head out of the critique here. It's a rocker. It's just not my favorite. It works on this album. I shouldn't be talking shit on sample here, but I mean, this is a screamer by the end of the song. This you want to talk about crescendos and the way that their musical crescendo hits. This one is a perfect example of how you can bring that power through the song. And it ends at almost like 5 minutes, and it doesn't feel like it sticks around too long, like Lifeboy did. So it works out here. It's just my personal grievances with sample.
You're gonna have them with every song once in a while. You're gonna find one that just yeah. But we're gonna pick it up a little bit with the next track, which is Wolfman's Brother. Uh, it's about Trey Anastasio's first meeting with John Fishman. I had to look that up because this is the strangest song on this album lyrically. Very confused on this one. I mean, it has a solid groove. I do think it gets redundant as it goes on in this context, but it's a fun tune. Yeah, I don't know. It's all right. It's all right for me. It's all right.
I knew coming in this album that was going to be a tough part for you because between Marshall and Anastasio, like you get into their more out there lyrical runs, and this is one of the wild ones. It wouldn't. What is it? It isn't who it would be if it wasn't who it is, kind of stuff. Like that line sums up the way they're writing in the song. Wolfman's Brother always has a funky groove behind it. Again, this is a tad bit slow compared to what you hear live. And it adds to the laid backness. And again, I'm putting this word into the ground here, but the accessibility of this album. So slow Wolfman's down a little bit and really rock it out. I believe we have Tower Power horns on this one as well. Yeah. So you get a little bit of that horn section in there. It's a get down jammer. It works well here for me in much more of a pacing aspect to connect sample and the next song. It does its job here. But again, I feel like the woes that you're having with it are a little bit because it's slowed down. When this is jamming, you don't, oh, that's a wild thought. When this, and a lot of them are jamming, you don't necessarily focus on stuff like the avant-garde lyrics because you're inside of a jam. But with this slowed down on an album, they're more there. They're more glaring in that aspect. So I can see where you're coming from on the old Wolfman's Brother ha.
That's what it sounds like.
Yep.
I was grateful for the band's website actually because that does have a lot of great insight into these songs and how they were created.
It does.
That definitely helped with a song like this one and even more so the next one.
Here we go. I've been waiting all week to hear
Uh,
what you think about Son of a Mule.
yeah, Scent of a Mule. I read it was about an alien invasion gone amok. Okay, makes sense. Very bluegrass influence, very plucky and picky. Not my go-to genre of music at all. I mean, it just isn't what I usually gravitate to. So that's going. This I just take this as this is a song you love it or you hate it. It's very silly. I believe that's what they were going for. They wanted to do a silly song with this really plucked thing. Part of me wonders, is this like bluegrass satire? Maybe I don't.
These are all valid questions because this is a Mike song. This is a Mike Gordon song. And sometimes even I have my, I'll use the word problems, but like Mike is a different beast. And even on this album where he does like this high pitched um country style, bluegrass style, it sounds like a parody style singing. I have to believe that it's not in his mind. I believe that he's having fun, but this is like super from the heart. So you listen and sometimes you're taken aback, like, is this really? Son of a Mule is a perfect example of that because on top of it feeling almost like a musical parody, it's aided by this wild alien invasion lyrics. Like, I don't know about anybody listening, but I can't think of too many bluegrass songs about alien invasion. So
No.
it has that little parody there. Um, this version is one of my favorite versions because you got Bella Flack jamming on it. Sometimes this one live, back in the day for me, learning them was not my favorite. I love a good Son of a Mule now because it gets my old bones up and dancing around. This is a good old pick up your knees and do some some straight dosey do type moves out on the lawn. But definitely a wild avant-garde piece here in the sense of this wild bluegrass hit. Uh, a jammer, and again, I'll stay on the Bella Flack. You know, if I get to hear Bella Flack on a Phish album, it's not a loss at all. But Son of a Mule, it takes some listening to get into Son of a Mule. It's definitely not. I go back to that accessibility. This is not the most accessible song on this album. I'm glad they put it here though. I don't think I think it fits this album, and I don't think it would have rolled on like Farmhouse or Story of a Ghost, Picture of a Nectar. I don't think it would fit there. It was when it's good to see Mike come out and put these songs out. Sometimes for me they fall a little flat, but Son of a Mule gets down. It's my jammer. It's my jammer. I
Yeah,
hope you can hear the conflicting the Phish thoughts in my head here because I don't want to fucking like crush Son of a Mule in an album aspect, but it definitely isn't the most accessible.
yeah, that's kind of why I'm wondering if it's satire or not, because it's just so off the wall.
It is.
I did see that this was one of the songs that Billy Strings played with them recently, which makes perfect sense for him and the artist that he is. I would say this song is overall not for me, but to end on a positive note, Mike Gordon, if this was satire, you did a much better job of conveying that than Katy Perry did in her video for Woman's World.
Heard that. Heard that.
I will. I'll give you that, man.
At least it was clear cut.
Yeah. Yeah. Stay tuned for more talk about Woman's World because oh boy.
Heard that.
But before we go there, that's a while from that. We've got Dog Faced Boy, the penultimate song, which this is an apologetic breakup tune, very short song. Kind of makes sense to have a more mellow song after the past couple because the past couple were pretty off the wall in terms of, well, lyrics especially, but music especially with the previous one. So more of that singer-songwriter kind of thing, but also a bit more avant-garde with the lyricism in comparison to If I Could and Life Boy. I mean, you can tell that by the title Dogface Boy. Yeah, I think this song is okay. It kind of just here exists for me. I think it works in terms of being a palate cleanser um after Son of a Mule, even though lyrically you did say he was developing as a singer-songwriter, and this one yeah, will yeah, it's a development sketch. I lyrically, I think there's just not what I go for. I'm picky when it comes to my singer songwriters. I'm picky.
No, I know, and so it's wild that we were talking about parody on "Son of a Mule" because, in my opinion, "Dogface Boy" is more of a parody. Even though it sounds like a beautiful little acoustic piece, this for me is more not only a palate cleanser because it is going into the final track here, but more so a parody piece because it's like this sort of tongue in cheek um throwback to this acoustic, almost like barbershop type of deal that they do every once in a while in their show. As far as pacing goes, I like it here not only for the palate cleansing deal of it, but it really, for me, it goes back to that set list mentality where we're going to bring you down before we hit you with the final punch. So this is a great example of that in that respect. It's a good old Dogface Boy. This is one that you'll hear every once in a while. Not necessarily my favorite live, but I love hearing everything. Dogface Boy, it's a good little piece here at the penultimate track. I think it does its job, as we say.
Yes, and now that we've come to the end of it, they're going to end it off in the most reminiscent song of their live shows, which is Demand, which is actually four songs in one.
Yep.
I'm not remembering the names of all of them at this point in time. What do you?
So it's Demand, and then there's I will butcher it if I say it. Yerushalayim Shells of Zahav. I'm terrible at that. And then you get that split open and melt piece of it as well. You talk about the end jam. This is what they do best. A good 10-minute and 42 song on the end here.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely could tell that's what they were going for. And it's very different live, I'm sure. I will say that. In an album sense, I mean, it's what represents this band. I totally get why they did it, but when I'm listening to it just as an album, it's hard not to get taken out of it, kind of. Just because the jam experience, I mean, it can work in a studio album, but it is really more of a live show deal.
Well, yeah, I mean and it has that the split up and melt jam inside of this song is actually from April 21st, 1993. So you have that like sound of like cars and stuff, and then boom, you're in a live jam. This is a lot of stuff packed into a final jam here.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of, I think it's a good representation of the band, even if I'll think, I wouldn't say it's a song I'm going to go back and listen to necessarily, but it represents what they're going for. I'll give it that.
Yeah, it's wild because Trey has this almost like Joe Satriani lick that starts off this Demand, this real clean, I'll dare to say like late 80s. And Satriani is just what comes to head, but it's really super clean. And then all of a sudden we starting to go into different thoughts. I'm never one to not love a good split open and melt jam. But was I expecting that first listen coming into this album? No, not at all. And did it take me out? I was confused a bit on this last track the first time I heard it. And then for it to end with this wild piece at the end there. But it's super reminiscent of their vocal jams as well. So as I sit here and say that I was confused, now knowing them and knowing who they are, it really was a perfect little pocket, a snapshot of the band for the closer here. And for that, it does its job. Now, I won't say to the first time listener that it will do its job. I think it ends up confusing first time listeners, but it's a good little pocket of Phish there with some wild tones and some actual live show stuff stuck in there as well.
Yep. Yeah. And wow, we're at the end of this. Hoist.
The end of the Hoist. We
Yeah,
did a
this
Phish album.
yeah, pretty quick, pretty brisk discussion actually. But I guess that's kind of what this is meant for. There's a you wanna you know.
There's so much beautiful discussion here. I tried not to jump all the way down into the Phish dirtiness here and leave our conversations accessible. But there's a lot of history inside of this album, and it is definitely gone down as something that has structured their playing and their growth, but also structured their live shows as well. Like I said, these are all stalwarts in their playlists.
Yeah, did any of them make it into the Mondegreen Festival?
Oh, off the top of my head, I know Down with Disease was there. On I'm gonna go out on a limb and say Wolfman's was played, probably Sample. I don't think Wrecker's Mailbox was there. I don't think If I Could might have been in Mondegreen. I've listened to it so many times. I can't believe I don't know off the top of my head. I think Scent of a Mule was on there too. But like I'm gambling, not looking at the set list right now, but it's a good gamble. A lot of these are super staples.
Okay. Yeah, it does seem like often a Hoist song makes it in. I did look at the set list for the one show I went to with you. There were no Hoist songs on it.
Yeah, that show at Merriweather, man, it was jammy, but there was not a lot of covers, not a lot of the stuff that we were looking for going into it, which is wild because usually they give me what I want at Merriweather. Not that they didn't give us a good show, but it was definitely didn't it wasn't packed with all the stuff we were looking for there.
Yeah, I mean I didn't know quite what to expect from it, honestly.
I heard.
It was an experience. It was an experience, I will say that. All right, as the Phish historian that you are, what is your grade for the album?
Hoist, the most accessible, I'll say it one more time just to knock it down in there, but the and a release from Phish that is widely loved. It is paced almost perfectly with just a few missteps. But from the start of Julius all the way to Demand, it packs a beautiful punch. I've said it as we've gone through. It's a little bit laid back from live versions of these songs, and sometimes for me that can take me a tad bit back. But if I take everything I've ever known about this album, take out the nostalgia, and really get down critically, I would have to give this album a B plus.
Okay. Um, I'm gonna go with a C. There was some stuff here that I really enjoyed. There was some other stuff that didn't quite connect with me, and I just think this. Yeah, I think that was as good as I was expecting, kind of coming into this, based on what I know about them. Um, yeah, I wasn't sure I'd love. I found more to like than I thought I would.
There you go.
So I will give it that. But yeah, there were some songs that just really didn't do it for me, and they're definitely acquired tastes.
Now I can hear you. I like even after we announced to each other that we were going to do Hoist, I keep going like, would Farmhouse have been better? Would would Story of a Ghost been better? Would a Junta have been better? But I'm glad we did this one.
Yeah,
It leaves us room to do others.
yes, definitely. It definitely does. And there will be more in the future.
There you go.
I can assure you of that. But if you gotta pick a
If
song pick for the album, if you have to pick one, what is it?
if I could, hands down.
Okay.
I put this album on to listen to that song on the regular.
Okay. I'm gonna go with Julius. I think that's a really fun.
It's a good one. It's one of my boys' favorite Phish songs. It's such a great one to hear live. It's a good one.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. But yes, we will be doing more Phish in the future. I am sure of that. Maybe even some of the live albums. Who knows? Who knows?
Oof. Oof.
Maybe. Who knows? I don't know. But next week, we're actually going to go to a band that we did before back in our first year of the show with a special guest, my friend Justin Sutphin, host of the Baltimore Battery podcast. He is a Baltimore sports expert, but he is also an expert on Metallica. And he was very generous to provide his insight for Master of Puppets a couple of years ago. And he's going to come back to do it for Metallica's Ride the Lightning. And it's a perfect time to do it because that album is turning 40 this year. So 1984, 40th anniversary. And that's going to frame what we're doing. We will also be picking albums from 1984 to discuss here. I'm very much looking forward to it because what a great year for music. So many classic songs and albums just in one year. So I'm really looking forward to diving into that. That'll be really fun.
Yeah, it's so wild to say that it's been a few years since we had him on the show. I'm psyched to have him back and do some Metallica. It's gonna be fun, man.
Yeah, it will. And on a very well regarded album of theirs. So that'll be really a good thing to do. And I'm really looking forward to it. So and I'm sure there's some crossover between the Phishheads and the Metallica heads.
Yeah, music lovers are music lovers. I don't know how much crossover there is there, but hey,
I'm trying here, man. I'm trying.
There might be though. There might be. Music lovers are music lovers.
That they are. But yes, in the meantime, stay safe. Don't get too down with disease because you don't want that. I know I don't. And we'll be back here next week to discuss Metallica. Can't wait for that. Bye, friends.
Peace.